Okay, so we actually internally refer to this project as the People's Powerhouse because at its core it's really a story about resisting a singular kind of institutional tourist icon and instead creating varied settings for varied users and for the least resources, essentially. That's important to us as a practice because we exist to enrich public life. We're on the mighty Murray River here on the country of the first people of the Milawa Mali and about 7 hours from Melbourne by car. So our response was very much about local resources, local suppliers, but as well as that kind of physical distance, there's a big sort of psychological distance to Mildura, I guess, and one of the key drivers for the project was responding to the community's view that this had to be something of its place and not Melbourne architecture imported into their community. This is the urban context for our precinct. So we're on the river, and our brief essentially was to activate the riverfront, which is really crawling with people from about 4 a.m. to sort of 6 a.m. Temperatures in Mildura are routinely sort of up in the high 40s, so this is a desert climate. And there's really no kind of amenity or activity to keep people there during the day. The CBD is not far at all from the site, but sits on an escarpment, so there's a full 2-level change to get down to the riverfront. And so this project is the catalyst for future redevelopment of the riverfront and also about connecting the city back to its river. The historical context is important too. This is part of a settler industrial complex that irreparably changed the wetlands of the river. It's culturally sterile as far as the first people of the Milawa Mali are concerned. And the local community have a real sense of pride in that technological innovation, but also a desire to centre Indigenous culture, which at this centre is through programming primarily. The master plan that we inherited sets out the whole riverfront redevelopment and our site as the kind of social and cultural heart for the precinct. But on appointment, we discovered that the community sentiment had really shifted since this had been endorsed, and there was a view that far less had to be built and that it had to be for locals. So we were supposed to be ripping on with the project. This is stimulus funding, but our project had a bit of an identity crisis. And so with council, it was really about saying, what is the broadest possible use of this place? And how do we put in place the macro elements to support that? So essentially the most for the least in this place and something distinctly Milduran. Our design response really hinges around 3 kind of big ideas. The first is from an industrial to a sensorial experience. So the powerhouse has a scale, a presence, and the thermal performance of an industrial building. An early move was to reinstate the ghost of the boiler house building, so that was part of the powerhouse's companion on site that was long ago dismantled. The boiler house is clad in the leaking rusted roof sheeting of the powerhouse building itself. And then those 2 vast roofs gave us the opportunity to turn this extractive, historically extractive complex into a restorative one with solar arrays and batteries. So the powerhouse is now renewably powered. Around these 2 mammoth structures, we kind of slung a series of almost follies, and these are the first hemp public buildings in Australia. So again, for a project that had no ESD drivers from the client's point of view, it was really about low-cost strategies that we could bring the council and the community on a journey to support. And this shift, I guess, from a kind of industrial complex to something much more haptic, so having people engage with this idea of atmosphere and temperature and materiality through this play of mass, skeleton, skins, and luminosity. So this is what the cast hemp looked like whilst curing. And here you can get a sense of the kind of the skeleton and then the hemp mass nestled underneath it, and the extensive kind of shade offered, both externally and internally. We tried to make sure that we used materials that had a nod to the past, that salvaged as much that was on site as possible, but that also had a kind of a textural richness to them that would reward the senses. The next big idea was a shift from a kind of formality to an informality. So with the boiler house reinstated, we were approaching the kind of village green that the master plan had originally set out. And that kind of Eurocentric terminology was rejected pretty early on by the community. So there was this idea of a much more fluid and shifting kind of ground. Obviously in Mildura too, it's about being able to have deep spots of shade. And so the powerhouse itself block some of the really hot winds that bring kind of red dust to sandblast the precinct. So creating these kind of spots in the lee and in deep shade for people. We were basically trying to use the least amount of built form possible to create pockets of space to be on the riverfront. And also, I guess, it was about making sure that this precinct could really work in the round. So it is the catalyst for the change for the whole precinct. So it needs to respond to community changes, but also to future development. The riverfront at the moment doesn't have a lot of activity, and so CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, passive surveillance, a kind of luminosity at night was really important. Accessibility and inclusion is critical too, so there's a local social enterprise that works with intellectually and physically disabled people who occupy one of the small tenancies in the site as well. So navigating that shifting ground, thank you, making sure that we had really short travel times for people to all of the toilet facilities throughout the precinct was important. And internally too, there's a kind of flexibility and fluidity to be able to close down each of the discrete spaces and program them separately, but also to have them open up together. So there's an operable glazed wall behind that curtain and a whole bunch of different skins and curtains that can provide both acoustic and visual privacy. The last big idea really is about the precinct needing to work from above. So this is the view from the city as you come down on the escarpment at grade, of course. From a distance, you can just see the bridge heading over into New South Wales. And so that really drove this language of kind of roofscapes. We talked to the local community about this as being hats, essentially, which makes a lot of sense to them. So kind of rusted patinaed hats. The toilet building has a kind of open sky around it that works in terms of legibility and creating a sense of entry. And then the kind of compressed sawtooth polycarb, which gives us the capacity to have this kind of glowing beacon at the heart of the site that says, something has happened here, come and see. And so what has happened, we hope, and I think Council's really supportive of it too, is that this is a place now that is not just kind of the consumption of the community as had initially been set out, but really this kind of scaffold for the community to see themselves and come into conversation with each other. At the opening, the Mayor said that Mildura finally had its own Fed Square, which, apologies to Don Bates and co, but I think is kind of proof that, this idea of a central space for everyone to come together has been delivered.